The Indian Conference on Artificial Intelligence and Law. In this final panel, we will be discussing a very interesting issue with our esteemed panelists. And I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists, Mr. Rodney Ryder, Mr. Raghav Mendiyatta, and Mr. Pinaki Laskar. So, in the 4 days of the conference, and because this session is also the closing ceremony of IndoCon 2020, the integral part of this discussion will be central on the issues related to ecology and data sciences. So I must say that today we have a legal research scholar, an entrepreneur in issues related to AI, and an IP law expert to actually discuss these issues and aspects. This is a very significant panel discussion because we will be actually taking a phased discussion so as to understand the modalities of this complex issue. Because apart from the mainstream issues of geopolitics, this issue itself is of utmost significance and differences. So let us begin with it. I would like to introduce our speakers one by one, and then we shall go ahead. Mr. Raghav Mendiyatta is a legal research scholar. He has been an alumnus of the London School of Economics and Political Science and the Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law, Patiala. He's also currently the researcher at the Stanford University Center for Internet and Society. He's also a legal researcher at the Columbia Global Freedom of Expression. The next speaker who is associated with us in this panel is Mr. Pinaki Laskar. Pinaki is a very, I would say, dear person of ISAIL because he is also an expert member of ISAIL, as well as he's a startup founder. He has an amazing AI startup by the name of Fisheye Box, and he has been working on automation, particular AI services, and many initiatives. Then the next speaker, who is Mr. Rodney Ryder, he's a very prominent name in the field of IP law. He is the founder of Scriptboard and also runs Metaset. So in the course of the discussion, I will be asking questions to each of the panelists, but I would be elated to understand how the panelists would like to take it forward. So I would like to ask Mr. Raghav to have his take on the issue which we are discussing, which is related to data science and ecology. So over to you. Thank you.
Good evening. Can I be heard properly?
Yes.
Perfect. So, to begin with, thank you so much for the organizers for having all of us. I've been following the other sessions through the conference, and I think the organizers are doing a great job. It's my pleasure to share the panel with Mr. Ryder and Mr. Laskar. So to begin with, I'd like to say, and getting straight to it, AI is often looked at as a silver bullet that can solve all of the world's problems. And when it comes to ecological data solutions, perception is not very different. However, it becomes very important for us to understand that technology is often value neutral. It's how we utilize and develop these technologies that then determines whether it takes a positive direction or a direction which is not very good for the environment and climate change in general. To give you an example, in 2018, big oil invested more than $1 billion, in fact, $250 million in AI. And they have used this money and they have used this research in order to better predict where oil reserves are and also in order to extract more oil from the reservoirs that they're already tapping. And that has obviously had, as you can imagine, not the best implications for the environment. We've seen how Google and Amazon are now partnering with big oil in order to ensure that their data management systems and their AI technologies can be used to develop and extract more oil from the reservoirs that already exist within our current resources. So we shouldn't look at AI as a be all end all in terms of furthering ecological data solutions. But having said that, I think AI does have massive potential in order to ensure that not only do we mitigate current global greenhouse emissions and further stop climate change on that front, but also invest in the adaptation of new technologies that ensures that we move further in our goal of improving technology and developing new technologies so that we can counter climate change as best as possible. So if I were to briefly talk about some technologies in a way that can mitigate current greenhouse gases, it could be investing in streamlining existing power generation, development, and also other industries. So when we look at streamlining power generation at the moment, we've seen how AI can be used in order to optimize the existing power grids so that there is reduced transmission loss and the power generation becomes more efficient and therefore better for the environment. In terms of investing in new technologies in this sector that help us in the long run. So when I say long run, I mean anywhere between 15 to 25 years. AI has been used and is being used in order to develop cleaner technologies. For example, batteries that have a larger bandwidth to store and transmit that power. So, there's less transmission loss and there becomes longer storage for electricity in those batteries. So I think there's a whole lot of potential, but there's also a lot of challenges. And to begin with, I think we need to take a balanced approach and not look at this as a be all end all.
Thank you so much for the incredible insight on this. I mean, it's really true. We can say that the utility and purpose construction of data as a resource for other operations with are related to fossil fuels and others is something which is really impeccable, and we must see the development so far. So I think there is a product service consideration also, and I think when we'll go deeper into this, it will have a lot of implications. I will like, I would be really happy to pass it on to Pinaki. So I have a question, and I would like to understand the perspective as to how this transforms with regards to the Indian sector. So I would like to understand the question, understand the aspects from this question from Pinaki. You can, elucidate examples on it. I would really be happy to hear. And then Raghav can also take an additional take on this. Yeah.
Good evening, and hi everybody. That we are into a end of this your conference, which you are holding for last 3 or 4 days, I think. And I have a very expertise panel over there. Already Raghav has shared his own opinion, and we'll listen to other expert also. Before that, I need to say something regarding artificial intelligence. Being a researcher, I have an opinion what we terms as a artificial intelligence. It's not at all artificial intelligence till now. Artificial is there, intelligence is yet to come. Right? So we are trying to give machines a power of intelligence, whereas we are also conflicting that how human will be protecting by AI. We have to understand the conflict between this is not that. Conflict is not at all between the human and machines. This is AI is not to equal or exit human intelligence. We have to achieve to a general purpose technology. It's called GPTs or Global Scale Platform or GSPs. These are the two major goals which I have or we have to achieve regarding your AI. Before understanding that, intelligence word are very important to understand. We don't understand the word of intelligence. You cannot regulate intelligence by law. Right? How can you regulate somebody by law, which is a form of mental ability. So intelligence, whether it is a human or a machines, it is about modeling of real world in real time. How do you model it? And your understanding, replying and or applying knowledge and skills on that reactions. These are intelligence. Even in the machines, we are far behind of intelligence now. What we currently see, I'll tell you one word that both machines and human are biased now. Not only machines, human also biased. We need to get out of it. And during this process of intelligence, we need to put the AI thinking inside a model of AI so that it reach to the achievement we are trying to get. So I have to give you the understanding of thinking of or AI thinking. It's a four-dimensional thinking. I'll explain that four-dimensional thinking. What is the four-dimensional thinking? So thinking is a one-dimensional. You are specialized in a particular vertical, or you can term as a narrow AI also. If it is a 2D, then it is a number of verticals, different verticals, multidisciplinary. You can it's on type of polymath. Third dimension is a mental model, like the three dimensions. We have uh, hacking of principles. From hacking of the principles, that is the mental modeling. And the 4D is vision, thinking of last 100 years and future 100 years. It is around the time, and that is the AI thinking means. And this will enable machines to operate in terms of intelligence. It is currently a algorithmic based or a machine learning based on data. There is no intelligence added till now. The neural network need to have a more power of EPU. What is EPU? EPU is emotional processing unit, which need to be addressed both cognitive and empathetical process of machines. So empathy is one of the major process to come nearby human intelligence. So I'll give you a when radical technologies are addressing humanity, and if AI will address what will happen actually, and what is the problem we are trying to solve. I'll just give it very two small example. When think about a headphone which will hack your mind and you make you learning as a kid as a first at the, any age. If you are in any of the age, you can learn as a first as a kid if you wear this headphone. This is the example where artificial intelligence will be operating when you have this type of intelligence on our machines. Number two, if you think about a gene drive, or genes drive that how we can edit a mosquito's DNA so that I doesn't need to find the malaria as a problem. That the gene will I can edit the gene of a mosquito so that he will be not liking smell of a human. So then the entire problem of malaria, dengue, this will go out. So this is what the radical technologies or the disruptive solutions we are thinking for AI. Mostly what we are doing, I always tell that this word is called advanced automations. It is not AI, it is called AA. That is advanced automations, what we are looking. And it's completely biased by the human for his own purpose. I have shared my own thought on process during the things. I'll give you more insight than what the artificial intelligence means and how I'm going to use for There is no comparison between human intelligence and artificial. There are two different verticals. Right? So we will not superpower either of them. And this, if you ask, if you I2A is one of the architecture DeepMind use, that means imagination to or imaginations to augmented agents. That is that AI can be imaginable also. We can imagine. We have used in a creativity. So if you say that AI music we have tried, we have already developed or are doing our arrange on this space that we can create a music which is mostly on creative space. So imagination is already doing by the deep.
Thank you so much. It was such a beautiful insight. I actually partly agree on that because yes, the evolution of artificial intelligence is obviously not equivalent to, in that sense, equivalent to what human intelligence is. Because at the end of the day, automation and I would say three terms actually: automation, augmentation, and analytics. These are dominating a lot, and I think that is a very important perspective, more or less, which is considering the the growth of data sciences in that matter. I think that same applies to any other disruptive technology possible. Uh, Yet, one consideration which I had on this was related to how unique can it be. And whenever uniqueness comes into picture, it is important to understand how, in considerations to, I would say, ecology, AI can affect the domain of IP. So let's take a basic understanding because I think already a lot debate and discussion, I would say research rather, on AI and IP goals. I would like to ask our panelist, Mr. Rodney, about the discourse as well as a proper academic development of AI and IP in the sense as to how can it transcend into environmental issues as well. So I would like to have your take, sir. Go ahead. Thank you so much.
Uh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me here, and it's great and it's a fabulous honor to be on the same panel as Raghav and Pinaki ji. Um, I'll just be as brief as I can because when you look at the law overall, the main issue before us is how to assign legal responsibility. So, is the artificial intelligence system a person? And to that personhood, can we attribute morality, cause, and legality? And going forward from there, can we then attribute ownership? And then the important question of who is the owner and if the AI system performs actions on their own, unforeseeable to the creators of that AI, then who should own that new intellectual property? As far as the ecological systems, the deployment of artificial intelligence so fully in data collection, data analysis, looking at samples from around the world, whether it's photographs, whether it is changes, and where the artificial intelligence systems have functioned superbly has been with handling and analyzing big data. But we also do have our compliances to see to. And in the present system, when we look at compliances, are the compliances or is the regulatory toolkit that we have sufficient? Is it sufficient for now? What kind of regulations will we need in the future? And ultimately, do we have an idea or the beginnings for a proposed structure on AI regulation and venture to say an AI law, because we still have our animal intelligence going around. We have monkeys and chimpanzees going around stealing photographers' cameras, but we still haven't been able to accord them creatorship and authorship, because we've not seen that independent creativity. So once we see that independent creativity, I think that's the first thing to be recognized, accorded a right and a responsibility.
Thank you so much. Actually, it's a very important point because when it comes to how the issue of how much credible the competitiveness and creativity of AI systems can be, it also affects the synergy. Therefore, I think it's an important aspect to which we will come into. So, I would like to request our panelist Raghav to intervene, and my question will be on this aspect. That's what Rodney and Pinaki agree with. How do you see the same development in global south, considering India, ASEAN, and for that matter, African nations? What do you think about the same? Yeah.
So before we proceed, I have I have something to say to Mr. Ryder, and I must say that the selfie that the chimpanzee took in terms of giving ownership, I think the chimpanzee had much better selfie sticks than I do, selfie skills than I do. So I think yes, we are lacking in terms of giving ownership and giving due credit. Mr. Ryder made a point about, is the current regulatory toolkit sufficient? And I'd like to pick up on that first. The short answer is I agree that this toolkit is definitely not sufficient. Recently, I was doing some research on the use of AI in the criminal justice system, and some very similar issues came up in that debate as well. And those issues fit in perfectly well with a debate in terms of AI and ecological data solutions. And Mr. Ryder pointed how there are concerns of morality, bias, transparency, and in terms of a regulatory toolkit to deal with all of these technologies, I think a toolkit is definitely needed, and that toolkit is lacking. Now, how other countries in the world are doing in terms of developing these toolkits? Some countries in Europe are obviously more advanced. For example, when we look at issues arising out of AI and how they impact privacy discussions, for example, the GDPR does have provisions on automated profiling, right? And it does talk about how profiling will be dealt with when it is done by AI. So yes, some jurisdictions are advanced. We do not have a regulatory toolkit or a semblance of any toolkit in India as such at the moment. And we do see some provisions in the Personal Data Protection Bill, but I still feel that there is room for a robust AI regulatory framework in the future. And in fact, a point that Mr. Laskar made, and he said, when we look at AI in terms of developing ecological data solutions, we need to be careful as to look at AI not to replace human intelligence, but in fact enhance it. I completely agree with that point. And to give an example for our viewers and listeners, if you look at architecture and if you look at how traditionally architecture has been used to make our buildings and our infrastructure more energy efficient, we've seen how AI can now be used in order to build on to the design that architects do and make our buildings and make our infrastructure more energy efficient. So in 2018, Google actually gave in charge an AI the duty to control its air conditioning and other systems on one of its data centers. So what this AI controlled air conditioning system was doing was it was looking at local weather forecast, it was looking at building occupancy, it was directly in touch with the grid, with the electricity grid, and it was communicating and seeing if there was a deficiency in terms of energy, it was regulating the usage of the building. So I think what we need is to look at AI not through a lens whereas it replaces human intelligence, but in a way that it enhances human intelligence.
I believe that's a very interesting point made. So I think that's a very important thing which many people are in consensus with, which is that artificial. One thing is that obviously there is a fear syndrome which is there, and yes, apart from there's some diversity. Like one aspect which we must agree on, and I think we do, is that artificial intelligence is like what Steve Jobs always used to say about Macintosh, that uh, I don't make computers just for the sake of it. I make computers because I'm just paraphrasing him. He makes computers because they actually are an extension of what humans wish to have. That's what he can conceive for iPhone. That's what he conceived for Apple. I think that's a very interesting point made. So I would like to ask Pinaki to intervene into this, and I would like to know what does he think with regards to the categories of the transforming AI systems. We can't say them directly AI, but at least we can say that they are just kind of budding AI systems or growing AI systems. So, in that regard, I would like to ask Pinaki, what does he think? Thank you.
The thing is, we are seeing the effect of automations. Even you can term it as a machine learning process. That machine is learning through the data. If you are thinking of a policy making, that making the data laws are important now, right? And making the model of or the architecture of AI need to be explainable. That how I am training my model, how the data was taken, where I'm getting the data. This need to be explained in each and every. That is the frame of reference currently we need, because I'm using completely biasing way, current way. Any companies who are using our email architecture or email inputs in his system is trying to get up most ROI in terms of their business. It is nothing related to others' privacy, ethics, and nothing is there. So the first things for a legal point of view or the first need to define the data laws. There is a need of this law immediately that we need to frame. Next, coming to the point to the intelligence. Again, if you are trying, you cannot bound intelligence by law. Remember this. It is a form of mental ability, right? You cannot bound it. But the way it was trained. So if you cannot, one point you have to say that how you, who will be responsible for that, for this system? See, is a developer or the business or the organizations or the users? How will define this system to be a responsible one? This is a data science itself. All this is a concept. Everybody is responsible in the system. It is not a one department. Remember this. Still, we think cybersecurity is a IT department, right? It is not like that. That is why it is not rectified. It is not happening. If you think IT, AI is a technology department, it's not. It is a whole system. Each and every person involved in the system is liable for it. Whether you are doing a business, where you are developing that, where you are supplying the data, you are making a decisions with somebody's commissions or the community work. Everybody in this system, in terms of AI, is liable, and that is the framework need to be done. It is not only one vertical need to be considered, because here it is very big. As I thought, this thinking process is a fourth dimensional. It can think about 100 years back and future 100 years, which is more powerful than human thinking. And that is where you need to frame in such a way which will come. But currently, again, the data laws need to be developed. And that is the basic point I need to explain. The lawyers know more the legal aspects, and explainability is more important. How you are training your system. If he is giving a predictions, if he given an analytics, how it is coming to that output, you have to explain, and that explain should be responsible. That means that is called responsible AI or explainable AI. That you should make it transferable to each and everybody in the system, even for the users to understand what is happening and how it is working. Thank you.
Really elated to know that. To add to this, we know that the concept of responsible AI and I would say ethical AI is very common. I think in the coming years it has become very common. But explainable AI is a very interesting one. Responsible AI additionally has come into being. Therefore, taking into the consideration as what we have discussed so far, we can at least say that at plurilateral levels, we lack because in global south countries, still the need of regulation also stems from the problem as to how appropriation is happening. Because, as very rightly pointed out, the whole thing is that the policy measures with regards to either environment or whether regulating how actually it works out, that part can only be clarified when the clarity stands with the conviction of action. At least in the global north countries, our panelists may agree that some degree of clarity might be seen, although it depends. In global south, maybe it's not the case. Yet, I am very curious to know from Mr. Rodney about this aspect. I believe the PDP bill obviously is there. Recently, the Department of Telecommunications also released an artificial intelligence stack, and they suggested some good reforms. However, we believe at ICL that they were still not too much complete. So, considering the same role here, I would like to ask, what does he think about it, and what can be seen in furtherance? Thank you.
I think excellent question, which all of us will have to, think about, look forward to the answers, because right now what we've done or what our government has done is prepare the groundwork. This privacy apparatus, which is at the center of the Personal Data Protection Bill. How will the apparatus actually function? And by apparatus, I am talking about the data commissioner, the authorities under the act, and how they will implement it. Because even across Europe, in the experience of the last nearly 25 years, we've seen the European Data Protection Directive be implemented quite differently. There are important and subtle ways in which, say, Germany differs from the United Kingdom. So I'll park just that one thought. And the second, as a crude analogy, we've seen the way certain laws across our country have been implemented by right-minded officials with a sense of duty, and how wonderfully that has been done. Will the data protection authorities stand up to powerful fiduciaries? That remains to be seen. And that is at the core, because ultimately the relative independence of these authorities, their ability to tap on technical expertise, their ability to crack the whip and enforce the law? Because on a lighter note, I remember in college meeting the former election commissioner T.N. Sheshan. And before he took over, we had folks from all around running off with ballot boxes into the fields and happily stamping ballot papers. But it was he who really cracked the whip, and politicians, members of parties around realize that, oops, there is such a thing as election law. So, will corporations, will data controllers and fiduciaries in India realize that yes, we do have a data law? That remains to be seen, because we've seen the Indian Information Technology Act and very powerful provisions there also, which till date, according to me personally, remain underutilized. So, what course the law will take, and we'll all of us, I'm sure, will be waiting and watching.
Indeed, that's true because I agree on this because uh, the IT Act obviously can transform a bit. Much of it can go ahead with it. Uh, However, yes, utilization of the same is not clear, and I think that's also something which our bureaucracy can take care about. So I would like to have Raghav into this, and my basic question, which would be on this issue, is this: when it comes to ecological strategy, because when it comes to certain countries who are P5 or G4, and this is also a very important aspect with regards to United Nations, because technology diplomacy and sustainable development are often coherently either dictated or represented. And often it is discussed that a country which is relevant enough in technology diplomacy, but at the same time very good in ecological diplomacy, they can actually really do well. Criticisms come for the US and China. However, that doesn't stand for India, at least to a limited extent, because obviously we know about the issues. Yet we see that there are certain good G4 countries, interesting G4 countries like India, Japan, Brazil, for an extent, I would say Germany also, and the permanent member France, who actually are focusing on both technological diplomacy and ecology. So, in that sense, can we see some ground of growth or development in that? And considering that technology diplomacy and sustainable development goals are being transfused, or I would say coalesced together, how can we see this development? I think this is a very important thing, and I would be elated to know from you. Thank you so much.
That's a great question, Abhinandan. And one thing that we've seen in terms of the recent Schrems 2 judgment as well, the importance of not just diplomacy between nations and closer cooperation between nations in order to chalk out some privacy considerations, data protection considerations, or AI considerations. But the Schrems 2 also underscores the need for unification across different jurisdictions. And as Mr. Ryder was pointing out, that there's been a difference, there's been a parity in the way developments have happened and data protection authorities have acted in different countries within Europe. So I think there is a greater need for closer cooperation between countries and a certain unification of legal standards when it comes to governance of these technologies. Another point, and if I were to quickly come to the solution for that, is the solution that I think the way ahead is closer cooperation and also multi-stakeholder consultation. So we recently saw in Pakistan where the government released their online harms rules, which is basically their model of intermediary guideline rules that governed social media platforms and other intermediaries. And these were obviously very regressive rules, very similar to the NetzDG in Germany, that required intermediaries to take down certain content online within 24 hours. And, they were very restrictive. And we saw how tech companies Google, Facebook, and other tech companies, they got together and they threatened to exit from Pakistan if these rules were not rolled back. And the government did ultimately have to bow down to pressure. The point, the lesson here is the importance of stakeholder consultations, not just between private players and the government in domestic jurisdictions, but also across jurisdictions. Because we cannot survive with a system where there is parity across jurisdictions. Because when you look at data flows, when you look at how artificial technologies works and how also how companies existing in one jurisdiction operate and control data arising from another jurisdiction, there's a very strong need for unification of laws. So that is my first point on this. Secondly, I'd like to talk a little more about something that Mr. Ryder brought up, which was whether our data protection authority, when it is established after the PDP becomes an act, can stand up to powerful data fiduciaries. And I think in addition to powerful data fiduciaries, it also remains to be seen if the data protection authority can stand up to the government as well. Because we've seen that the way the PDP bill was drafted in its latest draft, there were wide ranging exemptions to the state. And when the state is using AI and when the state is using disruptive technologies, such wide ranging exemptions to the state also put the privacy concerns of individuals at risk. So, in addition to whether the Data Protection Authority can stand up to private data fiduciaries, I also think that there is a strong need for the Data Protection Authority to stand up against the government.
Very well agreed on that. And I think it's a very important point rightly made. So we are open to take questions from the audience as well on this issue, because I think we have discussed some very important contours of this. However, we will at least I will at least take one question for each panelist. So I'm open if the audience wishes to ask any question, and at the same time, if they wish to ask either through chat or through other means, we are open to take the questions. So I would be taking concluding remarks from all the panelists now, amidst the audience asking questions. And I would request them for just two things. First, we have the closing ceremony, which will be happening for just 10 minutes. So I would request them to just stay for 10 minutes. And we would have kind of a group photograph online, a virtual group photograph with the organizing team of the Indian Conference on Artificial Intelligence and Law. So I would request our panelists to stay for just 5 to 10 minutes after the concluding remarks have been given. So the first concluding remark I would like to have is from Mr. Rodney. When we, and the concluding remark would be on this note that it is clear from this discussion that we actually have certain unutilized tools. Certainly, we need to fix our policy aspects, and we need to transform transparency and trust as very impressive and valuable ethical assets in data-related governance issues. So, obviously, I would not ask how would you see the future to it, but I would ask you in this way as to what creative avenues are possible. So I would like to have your take, and let's begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abhivardhan. You're asking the wrong person for creative avenues simply because we as lawyers are trained to think from a very orthodox, statist, quoist kind of regime that the law is. But jokes apart, I think that if we have the inclusion of all of government, for example, parliament, totally in sync with what needs to be done, what needs to be changed, and what needs to be changed over and over again. One of the problems in our country, at least, is that once we make a law, we tend to forget about it for a long, long time. That will definitely not work for us in the present regime. When we look at tricky issues, I think that our courts historically have been excellent at allocating responsibility, at figuring out the consequences of harm, also the benefits of ownership. So I think that the courts will interpret. It's up to the legislative to really step up, make laws, and where the laws don't turn out as they hoped, to quickly repeal them, make new ones. The executive in the middle to perform its roles, to look at how the law can be enforced, to look at using tools. And I think apart from the tools uh, investigation, when it comes to cybercrime, you have a multiple set and area of things that can be done. And uh, data protection again has to be interpreted in favor of the data subject, and uh, that point will also be at the core of where we are looking at and what path we are looking at going on in the future. I should think the future for us is bright. I am optimistic. I think we have a wonderful set of people who will take things forward. I only hope that we learn quickly from our mistakes, try not to pin the blame here or there, but do away with things that aren't working, and get revisions to our law, to our working, to our standard operating procedures, and move on. At this point, I'd also like to thank all of you for being a very patient and encouraging audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm really elated to know. So we will take two questions also. One question, I think any panelist can take it as they wish to, uh, but after the concluding remarks. So I would like to go ahead to Pinaki. So the simple thing is that while we know that the culture of development of AI is obviously not that much absolute, and not in coherence with the fiction that we always consume, that okay, it's that absolute AGI and all that. How do you see the trends in India, like the disruptive technologies per se, and what we can learn from it in general? Actually, I would say some avenues. So I would like to know your take on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. You'll get the clarity on this. What is the current status on that? I'm doing two projects. One project which will giving you a mental status or mental uh, health from your social media data. It's called web. You said technically it's called web scraping. So I'm trying to give our mental health conditions, this is social media and chat data, and try to help him to how to use this for a good and protect him from doing some negative things. Similarly, there is another project which I already diffused, but that commission's work is already started. That I need to use a real-time voice of other persons in a video or in a photo. Like if you have heard about the deep tech, right? Deep tech using a deep fake technology. Can it's as a model where you can use real time. You can change somebody's voice. Real time, you can change somebody's face, and there are commission work in market. See, this is how it is already into play that somebody want to change his voice and want to use a video over there, and this work is coming as a commission work. So how do you protect it? It's already started. Here is you need a actually You need a law over there to protect these things. Otherwise, as a technology, it can change anything, whatever the client is looking for. Like it is, you will not be able to understand it in the virtual world. It's mostly in the virtual world. If I am there or I am not there, prospect of deep tech, I'm using for a good, for a mental health conditions to protect him, and otherwise, I'm using again the deep tech for a virtual and a fake identity, where he is giving excuses, and it was used for some of the commercial work also in coming and in past days. Maybe taken as a PR, and that was taken as a PR project also, that they have used technology, but it is dangerous for human beings. Remember this. And here we need to understand how the legal framework should work. And this is the point I need to address, and that the questions, I think you have got that difference between these two, and got the answers we are trying to, I am trying to say, and you are looking for.
Thank you so much. So I would like to ask Raghav for his concluding remarks on the avenues we have discussed so far. And considering that we know that yes, transparency and robust accountability paradigms are required in India, I believe it might happen. I think we can share Mr. Rodney's optimism on this. And I think he really made an interesting point that, for example, a country learns humility, and when a country and its bureaucrats do that, it actually helps them the most. I think we can get examples from all around the world, from the US to Israel to Russia. That humility and understanding what the risks can be and what are you doing is something which is important. Currently, I don't think it's there in India, but still, I think in the legal reforms, if we expect that, then I think it will be a good thing to do. So, considering that, how would you like to conclude this? What do you think? Yes.
So to conclude, I would just like to talk about two principles that I think are central in terms of developing this technology, and two principles which should be underlying any kind of legal framework when we do come up with it. So on the technology side, I think any technology at this point should be developed and enhanced with a socially beneficial motive. I think that is a principle that must underlie the development of any technology on the AI front. And at the development stage itself, technologists should be cognizant that their technology should not lead to creating or reinforcing unfair institutional bias that already exists. On the legal regulatory side, I think the two principles that are important and that we have spoken about in this 1 hour are one, the need for an adequate accountability framework that the law incorporates, and secondly, incorporating privacy by design. So I don't just think privacy is something that should be enforced by the judiciary, but privacy is something that should be a part of any kind of legal framework that is developed by design. So I think if we keep these four principles in mind, that would be a good starting point going ahead with the development and enhancing of these technologies.
Thank you so much. So here we reach the end of the panel discussion. However, we will take some to end it further. So I'll take the question of Shrikant first. It's a question directly addressed to Raghav. So the question is that what are the challenges in the Indian context to use of AI applications in crime forecasting? Because algorithms will analyze numerical factor which will be constitutional in nature primarily. That's his views. I would like to know from Raghav how does he wish to respond? Thank you.
So at the risk of digressing away from ecological data solutions, we'll answer the question. And there are two very inherent risks that I have worked on in my research on AI in the criminal justice system. So my research was focused on using AI in order to reduce judicial pendency. But if we talk specifically about crime forecasting, the two major challenges are one, reinforcing institutional and socio-economic bias in the system, and secondly, privacy concerns. So when we talk about reinforcing socio-economic biases, when you use a predictive policing model, you are bound to reinforce certain socio-economic biases in terms of identifying crime hotspots. So, for example, if you're talking about a closely congested or a slum area for that matter, there's a possibility that there's a higher rate of crime that has been reported and reported in these areas. So, when you talk about policing, predictive policing technologies, it is also rely upon data, upon feeder data that, if used in the absence of a robust personal data protection mechanism, can be inherently violative of the constitutional right to privacy. So I think these are two challenges that I worked on amongst many others.
Thank you so much for the same. So here we end the panel discussion 4 of the AI General Assembly. I would request the panelists to just stay for 5 minutes while we go ahead with the closing ceremony, as we will be introducing some very impressive releases. And I would also urge the audience to stay in for a while, because this is a very crucial moment for us. This is the first flagship conference by ICL which we organized virtually. And I must admit that our team of 5 to 6 people organized this fantabulously. So please stay for 5 to 6 minutes more, because we are going for the closing ceremony. We'll just give a brief of what happened. Don't worry, it won't be boring for you. It will be really interesting and some really amazing developments. So, for example, we published 4 reports. We approved 4 reports within the AI General Assembly of a democratic forum. And today we came up with a very interesting resolution on 4 different agendas that we had discussed in these 4 days. Amazingly, we garnered a lot of participation, but maybe due to some technical issues and other adversarial circumstances, the turn up of the delegates was less. However, the participation with regards to commitment and endurance of the delegates was amazing. And to commemorate that, I would request the members to stay just for 5 minutes. We'll just get back. Meanwhile, Aditi would be there to